Since 2000, the self-offing rate in the United States has increased by 50%, from 11 per 100,000 people to 16 per 100,000 people. Many would blame modern tech for much of this increase. People are more glued to their phones and computers than ever before, leading to less human interactions and more isolation, resulting in higher levels of depression and thus more self-offings. Now, that could very well be a factor, but something that has a much more concrete connection is a medication called fluoxetine or Prozac. Prozac is a medication that is supposed to treat depression, OCD, panic disorders, and bulimia. Theoretically, it is supposed to accomplish this by increasing serotonin levels inside the brain, which seem to have a positive correlation with mood, emotion, and sleep. Today, Prozac is the 25th most prescribed medication, with an estimated 23 million patients within the US alone. So at first glance, Prozac seems like a miracle medication that has helped hundreds of millions of people overcome the darkest parts of their lives. But what if I told you that Prozac was actually doing the exact opposite? You see, while Prozac may be successful at giving patients a surge of joy or excitement, over the long term, it can actually make patients more likely to end it all. Surely, such a severe side effect was an unintended consequence, and something that Eli Lilly, the creators of Prozac, simply didn't discover during their initial studies. Well, actually, there's reports from the British Medical Journal suggesting that Eli Lilly not only knew about these side effects, but that they went as far as concealing the evidence that was suggesting this. One of their own studies found that 38% of patients taking Prozac displayed symptoms of agitation and aggression, while only 19% of patients taking the placebo displayed the same symptoms. And this was way back in 1988, but Eli Lilly allegedly never handed over these findings to the FDA clinical reviewer who was responsible for approving the medication. Now, this could have been an honest mistake, but when coincidence aligns with opportunity, that's rarely the case. Not to mention, this is just one of Eli Lilly's many allegations and settlements. But despite this shady history, Eli Lilly is not only doing well, they're doing phenomenal. In fact, their stock is up 5x within the past 5 years alone, which has given them a market cap of just over $400 billion. At this point, they're often trading spots with the J&J for the title of world's largest pharmaceutical company. So here's how Eli Lilly managed to make $400 billion worth of blood money. Taking a look back, the story of Eli Lilly dates back to the late 1800s to a man named Eli Lilly. Eli was a Civil War veteran, having served as a colonel during the war. He wanted to transfer the altruistic ambitions of the Civil War into a company of his own, only instead of fighting slavery, he would be fighting disease. And with that, Eli would open up a small laboratory in Indianapolis in 1876. Eli wasn't creating anything groundbreaking per se. He was simply producing and selling medications that were already on the market. But thanks to his war legacy and a lack of big pharma, it didn't take Eli very long to get the people of Indianapolis behind him. One of the first medicines that Eli sold was quinine, which is used to treat malaria. This alone allowed him to reach over $4,000 worth of sales by the end of the first year alone. That's over $120,000 today. Within just 3 years, he would over 10x that amount, growing to $49,000 in sales or over $1.3 million today. All of this extra revenue gave Eli plenty of headroom to expand and invest back into the business, and that's exactly what he would do. In 1878, Eli would hire his brother James as his first full-time salesman, and James would start marketing the product across the nation. Back at home, Eli was also heavily investing into research and development. One of their first inventions was adding fruity flavors and sugar to their pills, which made them much more palatable and thus far more popular. As their medicines gained popularity across the nation, Eli would go ahead and formally incorporate the company in 1881, and this marked the beginning of Eli Lilly's monumental rise. Within the next 20 years, Eli Lilly would grow to over 2,000 product lines, more than $300,000 in annual sales, and nationwide relevance. But Eli never let this success get to his head. He strongly believed that the industry needed ethical reform, that miracle medicine needed to be replaced by medications that had strong scientific backgrounds and mountains of evidence. These are the only types of medication that Eli carried up until his death in 1898, and his son Josiah would uphold this legacy after he took over. During the early 1900s, Eli Lilly would become masters of manufacturing, which was really the secret behind their extraordinary reach and scale. In fact, Eli Lilly was so good at manufacturing that they would often have excess capacity that they would sell off to their competitors. By 1917, they were operating the largest capsule factory in the world, producing more than 2.5 million capsules per day. But with Eli's son at the helm, it seems that this success did get to his head, as it wasn't long until we saw the first inklings of monopolistic anti-consumer practices, and this started with none other than insulin. In 1921, 3 scientists from the University of Toronto began working on a treatment for diabetes, which at the time was deadly. These guys would end up developing a commercially producible insulin, which ended up winning them a Nobel Prize. Eli Lilly was watching all of this unfold from the sidelines, and they were extremely interested in this project from the very beginning. But to their disappointment, the researchers were extremely hesitant in regards to working with a commercial firm. They had much more altruistic motives and were more concerned about insulin helping people as opposed to generating a profit. But despite this, the researchers would eventually team up with Eli Lilly when they realized that this was the only way to reach the scale they dreamed of. And with that, Eli Lilly began selling insulin in 1923, and they've had a monopoly over insulin ever since. In fact, to this day, Eli Lilly, Sanofi, and Novo Nordisk control 90% of the US insulin market. For the first time, Eli Lilly had a medication that people would buy regardless of their financial situation, and this would quickly show during the Great Depression. While people were losing their life savings, companies were going bankrupt, and investors were losing millions, Eli Lilly would actually reach record high sales of $13 million in 1932. That's the same as $287 million today. As you can see, with insulin, Eli was starting to veer off their altruistic roots, but they had yet to turn to the dark side completely. In fact, throughout the next few decades, they would be involved in a few commendable efforts, starting with World War II. During the war, Eli would partner with the American Red Cross to process plasma for wounded soldiers. And by the end of the war, they would process over 2 million pints of blood, which was about 20% of all of the plasma that was processed in the United States. But their contribution to World War II was nothing in comparison to their contribution to polio. If you paid attention in history class, the name Jonas Salk may ring a bell. Salk is the legend that created the polio vaccine, but not only did he create the vaccine, but he also actively chose to not patent it so that it could reach as many people as possible. Obvious reasons, Salk is often described as a hero, and rightfully so, but he didn't do it alone. While he had created the vaccine, it still had to be distributed to people around the world, and the first person to step up to the plate was, of course, Eli Lilly. But this was also one of the last universally good activities that Eli would participate in. Since then, most of their philanthropic efforts have had an undertone of branding and marketing, which isn't the worst thing, but also not ideal. But what has really given Eli a bad rep since then is their medications themselves. One of Eli's first controversial medications was Darvon, which came out in the late 1950s. The medication was advertised as a mild painkiller, which it was not very effective at, but what it was effective at was getting people addicted. And this is not too surprising when you consider that it falls into the opioid category. By the early 1970s, these dangerous side effects were starting to become clear, and that nonprofits like Public Citizen were starting to advocate for a ban. Eli would of course try to defend Darvon, claiming that it was safer and less addictive than morphine. But the allegations claimed that Darvon was actually even less effective than aspirin in terms of pain relief, but even more effective than the white stuff in terms of killing people. Despite this, it wasn't until 2010 that the FDA would finally ban Darvon, meaning that Eli was able to profit off Darvon for decades. At least Darvon was just addictive. Some of Eli's other medications were straight up harmful, like an antibiotic called erythromycin. In the 1970s, evidence emerged that this antibiotic was toxic for the liver, often resulting in jaundice. The FDA would initially ask Eli to discontinue the product, but after another review at Eli's request, the FDA would somehow change their mind. Another Eli medication that was straight up deadly was their synthetic estrogen, DES. Apparently, the medication was supposed to prevent miscarriages, but it actually just led to women developing cancer. Worse, it led to their daughters developing cancer as well. A couple of class action lawsuits were filed against Eli, but none of these really went anywhere, as Eli would just pay these people off by settling outside of court. You would think that Eli would be more careful after these lawsuits, but they would actually become more risk-on with an arthritis medication called Oraflex. In the early 1980s, dozens of people taking Oraflex would end up dying due to liver and kidney failure. Any moral pharmaceutical company would pause the sale of Oraflex and conduct more testing, or at least include a warning label. But what Eli did was try to cover up the fact that people were dying from regulators. And this is not an allegation. This is actually a fact, as Eli would end up pleading guilty. But do you know what the fine for this heinous crime was? A pitiful $25,000. Usually we talk about how such fines are nothing in comparison to what these companies earn. But $25,000? I mean, that's literally something that a lot of everyday people can afford. Diabetes patients literally have to pay more than this to Eli for insulin over a 5-year period. So yeah, you can take that for what you will. All of this brings us into Eli's worst offense, which is of course Prozac. In the late 1980s, Eli would launch an antidepressant called Prozac, despite allegedly having evidence that Prozac increased the likelihood of people self-offing. When third-party evidence came out against Prozac, Eli would launch a full-on campaign to defend Prozac. It appears that Eli was successful at defending Prozac, but that also means that humanity was unsuccessful at defending our most vulnerable. And the results speak for themselves. People ending it all has increased by 50% over the past 20 years, as hundreds of millions of people took Prozac. Since then, Eli has battled with hundreds of lawsuits and dozens of fines. But while this has created some friction for their business, it has by no means stopped the damage. None of this is to say that Eli Lilly is evil just because they put out medications with side effects. The reality is that no clinical testing is perfect, and some side effects only show up at scale, so that's not a problem. The reason that Eli Lilly is evil is because they do not respond to this damage. In fact, they actively tried to get away with it. They deny that their medications are causing the damage. They insist on keeping their medications available despite mounting evidence against them, and they even conceal evidence that makes their medications look bad. Not to mention, they also exercise monopolistic control over much of the pharmaceutical market. All for what? Well, to sell as many medications as possible and to maximize profits over human lives. And looking at the numbers, this is one thing that Eli is extraordinarily good at, as they're headed towards becoming a Fortune 10 company. But while they may still have an empire, it doesn't change that their empire was built on blood. Did you know about Prozac or Eli Lilly's role in all of this? Comment that down below. Also, drop a like if you agree that Eli Lilly is a truly evil company. And of course, consider checking out our Discord community to suggest future video ideas and consider subscribing to see more questions logically answered. But until then, I'm Hari, and I'll see you guys on the next one.